this is the RGB20SX from PowKiddy. I really like it, but it's coming under quite a lot of criticism in some other reviews, and one of the key things that keeps getting mentioned over and over again is the somewhat ski slope-like rear triggers that are on there. They were overly large, they feel a little uncomfortable, they stick out a bit much and make it not very pocketable. So rather than complain about that, I figured I should do something about it, and I've designed these little slightly more neatly fitting flush fit 3D printed triggers. What do you reckon? So in this video I'm going to show you how I did it and how to install them if you want to get some yourself. Okay, so I'm back again with my RGB20SX from PowKiddy. I've already posted a video of my initial unboxing and first impressions, and I like it. There are a few shortcomings, and I am still playing a lot more, doing a bit more testing before I give a full review. But after doing my initial video and quite liking it, I thought a lot of things about this were better than I had anticipated. It feels a bit more well built. It feels more high quality than the RGB30, which it is based on, which is the landscape version of the same console. The matte finish and the really solid feel to the plastic is nice. The shape is kind of reminiscent of the Analog Pocket, but it is much cheaper. And don't get me wrong, I mean, it does feel cheap in some ways too, but for around $90, absolutely rammed full of games. So far, so good. I am enjoying this thing. But after doing my initial video, I went and watched a few others because I don't tend to like seeing what other people think before I make my own opinions. Like, I want to kind of get my own feel for it and then find out what other people think. And opinions were generally mixed. Some people were fairly balanced. Some people really liked it. But some, I think, were a little overly critical of it, but you know, we're all entitled to our own opinions. But one thing that kept coming up is nothing to do with what you see here, but it's to do with this on the back, these kind of ski slope trigger buttons. Now, when I first got it out of the box and I was handling it, I was literally just talking about the console at the front, and my fingers started to notice this at the back, and I thought they felt okay at the time. I thought they felt quite good. They were quite responsive. They were quite easy to reach. But the first time I noticed it was an issue was when I went to put it down, and it just kind of sits on a real angle because these stick out. Also, like, you can't really slip it in your pocket or anything like that because these will catch. But mainly, when I was playing games that don't use these triggers, they felt like they were really obviously there in the way. So I'm concentrating on the main game and the buttons here, and I couldn't really get a very comfortable grip without being on these buttons. So that got me thinking, would there be a way of having them a little more flush fitting? And then when I've had an idea like that, it just nags at me until I've done something about it. So long story short, and many prototypes later, I have designed some 3D printable replacement triggers for going in there. They are not perfect, but they do deal with the issue of these being so prominent. It's a much more flush fit, and they do work. So I'm gonna, in this video, show you what I've done and how I went about modeling them, and then I'm going to show you how to install them if you want to print a set yourself and try them out. I'd be intrigued to see what other people think about them. Good news about this console compared to the RGB30 is it is really easy to disassemble. Once you've got the screws out, the two parts do separate. With the previous one, you needed to get in there with a spudger and undo a load of clips. This is much easier. So first things first, we're going to switch it off. Just press and hold the power button for what feels like an eternity. There we go. You just wait for the little LED to go out there, and we are good to go. So I've got a soft cloth, and these are crosshead screws. They're fairly large, so the bit that I am using is a Phillips 1 PH1. So we'll just undo those 6 screws first. Right, so it will just lift off the back. So these buttons are attached to it, and then also the battery is held in this rear half. And there's a connector down here that you can just carefully wiggle and pull out from the main motherboard. And then this can go to one side because we're just concerning ourselves with this part for now. But while we're here, if we're looking inside, if you wanted a little bit of a nosy at the internals of this thing, I'll investigate them further in future, but this is what we've got. And the main thing to notice here is that there are 4 little tactile switches that these levers kind of rest onto and press and engage. So that's what we've got in there. I'm just going to pop that elsewhere for the moment. Right, so the switches themselves, or at least the triggers, you can see they're injection molded pieces. There's a little rubber bit on the back there which presses against the buttons, and that's pretty much it. They're quite a loose fit there. They will sit flat and then raise up, and the top section is wider, so it's larger than the hole. So let's pop one of them out. Now to get them out, they're held in place with like two little circular pins on the plastic, on the yellow plastic, and then there's two circular cutouts in the black plastic. So you need to kind of push those in to get them out. And I found the best way of getting those out is with the help of a spudger, just to get into the gap and then just try and pop them out like that, and they'll come off relatively easy. So if you look now and you compare the button to the hole that's left behind is quite a bit smaller. So I figured that there was definitely scope for modeling something there. So let's just pop them all out. One thing I did find was I assumed that they would all be the same. So I modeled the first go at this, I modeled after the L1 or R1 shape and figured they would all be the same. But the L1 and R1 are the same as one another, and the L2 and R2 are the same as one another, but they do differ between them. It's proving a little awkward, this one. Turn it upside down, see if I can get in there a bit more easily. There we go. So they are now all removed, and the little screw has dropped out that was held in the casing there. So let's take a little look at those. So as I say, they're an injection molded piece, kind of rounded with a flat surface there, a little bevel, the bit with the two pins, and then the part that kind of pushes against the button, and the rest of it for sort of the structural side of it. So they are well built and they are well made, but they do stick out quite a bit. So I'm just going to pop those to one side, and then we are going to take a look at what I've made. So I'll keep, say, the L1 there, and let's find my L1, because I had to take quite a different approach to it, because I wanted to design it so that it could be printed in one go without support. So if you're not familiar with 3D printing, it basically puts down a very thin layer of plastic at a time and gradually builds up. And if you look at the trigger that I've made here, I don't know if you can make out, but there are lots of little lines there from the individual layers that have been built up. So this is the flat surface that it sits on, and then it has to gradually add the layers as it goes. And if you've got a shape with overhangs, you either have to add supports, which is a bit fiddly, and when you break them off, it tends to spoil certain aspects of the thing you've molded. So other than that, you get strategic with what you're doing. So you use angles and things. So if you've got a wider section like I've got there, you gradually widen it and so on. So I had to think about what the pressing surface was like, and I had to consider the pivot point and the contact with the button. But other than that, I pretty much ignored the design of the original button. You can see that these two there are similarities there, but the build is very different, and it's quite a sort of a solid piece there that it's printed. So I've put a little dome in there because the flat surface was too high up on the buttons. But if you have an opening, then that means there's an area suspended above. Whereas if you've got a dome shape, it gradually gets narrower, so you can build up without support. To get the pin to engage and to have some flexibility, there's a circular cutout, but also a slight gap there, which allows a kind of clip-on mechanism. But anyway, enough about the button itself. Let's just show you how I get these in. So I do this from the inside. So let's just make sure we've got it right. So if we're holding the console like this, this would be the left. This is my L1. So the way I get these to fit in is they'll kind of click this way up and then swing around in place. So I find that if I just locate one end on one of the pins, like I'm doing there, it'll just sort of locate, and then the other one, a little bit of pressure with your thumb, and it'll just click in place. I've deliberately left it a little loose because I didn't want to get it too snug, too tight a fit. I didn't want to put too much strain on these pins. I might experiment with extending it in future, but for the moment, I've got these working. Honestly, the amount of modeling I had to do to get these to fit took me, well, I'm not even going to say how long, but it was a long time. So yeah, that pivots over, and then it sits flat inside with the area that's going to push on the button. And on the outside, you can see it's a much more flush fit on the console itself. Sticks out a little bit. There's enough to engage to press, and it's got the L1 molded into it, so you can tell which button is which. So that's the basic setup. So let's get to the others. Now, L1 and R1 are relatively straightforward to get in. The other two are a little trickier, but basically you do the same. You line up and you flip them over. Now with these two, it was a little trickier because there's this screw post here. Now you could take like a needle file or a knife and just trim a tiny bit off those, or you can do what I do, which is, let's see, we've got the L2 going here. So I've got L2 line up, pop it in place. Now as I flip it over, you'll see it'll just bump into that bit. What you can do is just a slight flex, very slight flex of the case and a bit of pressure against the button, and it will just sort of pop past that point. So that's the easiest way to do it without having any cutting or anything like that involved. So that then clicks in place there, comes over again. It's in the way a little bit, but a bit of pressure and it just pops in position. So they are all in place like that. Now, if you go like that, they'll swing down, but if you keep a little bit of pressure there, you can see that's how they go. So I've done it so that the L2 and R2 stick out a tiny bit more than the L1 and R1. But I mean, there are limitations with 3D prints, and there are quality limitations as well. I did try printing it on 0.1, which is 0.1 of a millimeter per layer, but it kept messing up. It did work better with 0.2 of a millimeter at a time, which is quicker. It takes just under 15 minutes to print each button off, or you can print them all off at once if you're feeling ambitious and you trust your printer more than I trust mine. So yeah, that is it. Now, one thing I did experiment with is the sort of sticky. You can see there's a small sticky pad left on this one now because it was a bigger one, and I sort of borrowed it and cut it up and experimented with putting it in there. And what I found is with the L1 and R1, the balance was very difficult to get right, and with any bit stuck in there, it just got too tight and wouldn't engage. With these two, they tended to rattle a bit without. So what I am going to do is just put a little bit of rubber pad on one of those. So I am going to borrow it from this one. Now the actual point of contact is quite small. So what you can do is if you cut that in half, you can then return it to the original button for if ever you put that back in, and there'll be enough on the surface there for that to work absolutely fine. Then with the remaining bit, if you cut that in half again, you've got like two small squares, and then tweezers and a spudger works best for this, I've found. But if you get that just lined up with the center of the hole and then just sort of nudge it around into the right position, apply a bit of pressure to push that in place. It just reduces the rattle a little bit on the buttons, because with the best will in the world, I did spend a long time and I did make a lot of prototypes testing and getting these to work as best I could. They're not going to work as perfectly as the originals, but they are much more out of the way than the originals, and a relatively simple 3D print. I think they're really good. I have done a bit of play testing with them. In fact, I've done a bit of play testing with a lot of them. I have made so many prototypes, just tweaking the shape slightly, getting it to fit better, because trying to get, like, there's all sorts of different curves in different directions and different measurements, and some of it is careful work with the calipers, some of it is just kind of trial and error really. But anyway, here we are. While it's open, quick look at the battery. We've got a 5000 milliamp hour 3.85 volt battery in here, and so far it seems to be okay, but again, it's a bit random in terms of the readings I'm getting and things like that. But that, again, is something I am needing to investigate further for another video. This video is all about these buttons. So, time to reconnect our battery. So you've just got to make sure that you get this the right way around. I mean, you can't put it in the wrong way around, it only works one way. So that just connects and plugs into its little socket there. Plugs in quite easily. And then it's a bit weird kind of putting things together here. There's like 2 foam pads there. So I find like, so long as I make sure that wire is clear of this screw post and that pad, so I kind of maneuver it into position there, that's okay. And when you're putting it together, because these kind of flip about the place like that, I find if I lie it that way and then put it together first, and you'll see that like with all that together there now, they're good, aren't they? Well, I'm pretty pleased with how they've turned out. I mean, you're just seeing them going in once and clicking. I've seen like about 50 go in and not work properly, so that's why I get so excited when I'm seeing these working. Anyway, let's pop the screws back in and give it a little bit of a test. So I find it works best to put the screws in the middle. It is a relatively soft plastic, and the screws are not machine screws. They are like self-tapping screws. So you've got to be careful you don't just strip out all the plastic that's in there and end up with a loose fit. So if they've gone in and out a few times, you can end up with lots of different threads and then it just won't grip. So to avoid that happening, when the screw's going in, turn it anti-clockwise until you feel that little pop and it drops into the thread. Then you can tighten up the screw. Do the same on this side. Now you will end up getting fingerprints all over the screen, so a quick polish with a soft cloth is in order before we do any more. So yeah, there is our end result. I think it looks a lot neater, a lot cleaner, and in terms of the feel, in terms of your finger fitting in the gap, like see here, it presses and engages really effectively. It's really comfortable to hold, and with this one sitting up a bit higher, like you're holding it in the middle like that, satisfyingly clicky. But as I say, I found the middle ones are a bit too rattly, so the little rubber strip does kind of sort that out. But I had no end of problems with the rubber strip on these, so I just got the tolerances just right to just sit snug on the buttons, and they're a little louder. Like if you hear the difference, if I'll put it next to my microphone. So this is the R1 and then the R2. So it's like a slightly higher pitch, but honestly, when you're playing the games, it doesn't really matter. And let's just switch on and verify that it does actually work. So we'll just boot that up, and it does take a while to boot up. And another thing you'll notice is that when you've been pressing these buttons, you do tend to inevitably get fingerprints down at the bottom there. But yeah, I think it is a really nice, I like the grip now, how that feels to grip it with it like this. My fingers can sit much more closely to the console, gives a much more comfortable feel. And I think like a lot about this feels cheap. Some of it feels surprisingly premium. I think the matte finish and the quality of the yellow plastic and the molding of the main shell feels quite premium. I don't feel like the original triggers really match that kind of sleek aesthetic, and I think that these, if I do say so myself, do. Like I say, I get these ideas and I think, oh, that'd be good. But then once I've had the thought, I can't leave it alone until I've actually had a go at doing it. And I think they've turned out pretty nice. And as you can see, if I just press on the L and R triggers now to cycle through the different systems that are on here, it works just fine. Left trigger, right trigger. I've got a dead pixel, and right in the middle of the screen as well. I don't know if you can see, just above in the top bit of the S on MSX, a little black pixel. So you see it on the S on Odyssey. So that's like the main thing that's bothered me with this thing. Everything else so far, so good. Like I've tried it with a few different operating systems. I'm gonna try and get our costs set up so I can do comparisons between a few different ones in my next video. But this one was all about these triggers, and yeah, I think I really like them. I like how they've turned out. If you want to try them yourself, I am going to put them on my printables page. They will be a free download. So if you have a 3D printer, or if you know anybody who has, you just need to download the STL files. I'll load them up as separate print files, and you can print them off yourself, test them out, and let me know in the comments how you get on with it. But that is it for now. I am going to go and do some more play testing, but I definitely feel like this is a decent, worthwhile, cheap upgrade to what I think is a really nice console. I think some people have been a bit harsh about it, but I think it's pretty great. I loved the RGB30, but I am a big fan of the Game Boy form factor. So what I was wishing for was an RGB30 with a Game Boy form factor, and that's kind of what I've got here. So for me, I think this is great. Some people think it's not so great, but you know, that's for you to decide. You will probably know watching this if it is for you or not. And if it is for you, and if you've already bought one, and if those previous triggers were bothering you, then this might be something you want to have a go at. Let me know what you think. So it could well be that I am the only person in the world who thought this was needed, and I'm the only person in the world who's going to end up using them, but I am quite happy with that. I really enjoyed that problem-solving process of actually kind of creating them, prototyping them, testing them, gradually getting closer and closer until I've got something that works really well and that I'm really proud of. So there's that. But more than that, really, hopefully other people will be able to try these out, improve their console, and get some enjoyment out of the fact that a solution exists to a problem that I have seen pointed out in a number of reviews. A lot of people didn't like those rear triggers, so try these out. Maybe we'll have a lot of people falling in love with the original rear triggers because these are so bad. I don't know, but it would be really interesting to get some feedback from some people there. I might see if I can get Z Labs to start stocking these. So if you haven't got access to a 3D printer, you can just order a set from there. So let me know if you've got this console and you've got access to a 3D printer and you try these out. Please let me know in the comments. Let me know what you think. Is this a worthwhile endeavor? I feel like it is. I'm really proud of the end result, and even if you're never going to do it, I hope you enjoyed the video anyway. So as for the console itself, I am quite enjoying it. I am still spending some time getting together, doing like a final review, maybe like 1 month on or something like that. And I know a lot of people have asked me things to test out and try out, and I've been busy doing all of that as I go along. And if you want to get hold of one of these for yourself, I'll leave a link in the description. And also, speaking of links, I've got the usual Z Labs affiliate link down there as well, where you can buy loads of cool modding gear at a discount, and you'll support my channel as well. But other than that, we are done here. And I'm going to go and play a little bit more and test out my cool new triggers. As I said earlier, I have already got an unboxing video and initial impressions of this cool little console. I'll leave a link for that up there if you want to give it a look. Otherwise, I'll see you in the next video. Bye.